right. Among the options for how to address sedimentation issues, we've mostly been talking about things to do in the lake so far. But there's also a whole watershed upstream from the lake. And so our next speaker is going to be addressing things that can be done in the watershed restoration, and its impact on sedimentation. And so this will be Dr. Colin Thorne. So Dr. Colin Thorne is an emeritus professor of physical geography at Nottingham University. He also works with Wolf Water Resources, a small consultancy based in Portland, Oregon. Colin holds degrees in environmental science from the University of East Anglia, where his doctorate was supervised by Dr. Richard Hay, who later supervised David Rosgen's PhD, whom many of you probably have heard of. Before Nottingham, Colin held appointments at the USDA Sedimentation Lab in Oxford, Mississippi, the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and civil engineering at Colorado State University. He has studied rivers and acted as a consultant on streams ranging from headwater creeks to big rivers like the Mississippi, Columbia, Missouri, Mekong, Ganges, and Parana. In 2013, he published a paper with Brian Kluwer of NOAA on incised stream evolution that launched the term stage zero, which is now widely cited and is the topic of his presentation today. On a personal note, when I started my PhD and did my dissertation research in 2007 at the University of Kansas, I used a report from Colin Thorne on stable channel design as kind of the jumping off point for my research. So Colin has always been kind of a celebrity in my mind because he was the expert that I kind of got started in this whole field by studying.
So yes, thank you to John and the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk to you today. And what we're going to do is try and break the talk into bite-sized pieces, because an hour is quite a long time. So we'll be looking at the kind of fluvial geomorphology 101, how water and sediment moves through the fluvial system. Then we'll look at where this idea of stage zero came from, its genesis. We'll have a break then and a little bit of a class exercise that will give you a chance to move around, chat to the people around your table, and not just listen to me continuously. We'll then look at the concept of beads on a string that you may hear a lot. Ellen Wohl uses a lot, others as well, as a way of compartmentalizing the river system and deciding where and when stage zero restoration may be appropriate. And we'll finish up with some examples and particularly stress the benefits, including sediment management, but also the risks that go with sediment management at the basin scale. So let's start with the first module, flows, sediment dynamics, and channel forms. And I'll talk about fluvial hydrology, hyperuric flow, sediment transport, and how these things combine to form channels. So simply, the work of the river, the job of the river is to transfer water that falls into the catchment to the basin outlet. And the river above, we're fully aware of, it's the surface water system and it responds to rainfall and snowmelt. What we sort of don't think about as much is the groundwater below, which supports base flows between snowmelt and rainfall events, and which is also extremely important. And especially, I think, in areas like this, the Flint Hills, we must understand how the surface water and the hydrogeology work in transferring water from wherever it hits the ground to where it leaves the basin. However, it's a mistake to think that everything that's underground is groundwater. And this diagram points out that actually there are two water bodies beneath a river. Yeah, there's the groundwater aquifer, the subject of hydrogeology. It's the phreatic deep groundwater. It responds to regional water fluxes. But there's also a hyperuric alluvial aquifer, which is actually part of the river. It's literally the hyperios, the river below. And I think there's a big neglect of that in fluvial hydrology. We don't really think about the subsurface water that isn't groundwater, it's part of the river. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. In terms of sediment transport, the other job of the river is to move sediment from the source through a transport reach and down to a depositional sink. And in this very famous diagram by Stanley Shum, it's shown as a characteristic cartoon, if you like. And what's going on here is in the headwaters, we've got active weathering, we've got steep slopes, we've got lots of small tributaries coming together, collecting sediment, delivering it to the trunk stream. In the middle course of the river, we have tributaries bringing sediment in. We have sediment coming down the main river. Most of it could be described as a jerky conveyor belt, Matt Condolf's term. But it's a jerky conveyor belt where a lot of sediment falls off the sides because we have sediment being stored in floodplains along the river. And then down at the outlet of the basin, sediment is deposited. We're at base level. This is the end of the conveyor belt, if you like. And we build a delta, or it goes into a lake, or it goes into the coast. And this sediment transport function of the river is really important. It's long been recognized. And I think it's captured very eloquently by Luna Leopold, who said that rivers are the gutters down which flow the ruins of continents, because over time, this is what leads to denudation, the lowering of the landscape. And those hydrological and geomorphic processes work together then to form river channels. So how do we get a river channel? Why is the river channel the way it is? Well, first of all, we have an input of water coming off the catchment, otherwise we can't have a river. We also have to have a slope, otherwise we don't get a river, we get what's technically called a pond. And we need a supply of sediment if we're going to have an alluvial river. Alluvial river is one which is self-formed. So the boundaries of the river are the outcome of the action of the water on the land, rather than being constrained by geology. Now, how does that actually work then? How does the channel get to be the channel that it is? Well, this was captured years and years ago, 1949, by J. Hoover Mackin, who said that a graded condition is attained in the stream over a period of years to decades when the slope at each point is delicately adjusted to provide, with the available discharge and prevailing sediment supply, just the velocity required to transport the sediment load input from upstream. So this is this dynamic equilibrium we're talking about is the end game for reservoirs that aren't properly maintained. So the river then adjusts and develops its channels just so to be able to transport the sediment load put in from upstream. But nature's design palette in what those dynamically stable channels look like is pretty broad. Whilst we think a lot of the time we have a kind of predator lock on single thread meandering channels, other design solutions are available in nature. And in Shum's famous diagram here, he characterizes those different channel forms, all of which are dynamically stable in terms of things like whether we have a low stream power or a high stream power, whether we have a big width depth ratio or a small width depth ratio, and particularly on the vertical axis here, the type and caliber and volume of sediment load. That's crucial to determining the configuration of the channel that results. But you'll notice one other thing about this colorized version of Shum's diagram, which is how green it gets down to the bottom right-hand corner there with those anastomose patterns, the meandering with oxbows and side channels. They're a lot greener, the island braided, than the ones that are dominated just by water and sediment. And again, we'll come back to that. So, I mean, this is all fine and dandy then. So the channel system evolves through time, adjusts to get a graded condition in which we're just transporting the sediment load through the system in equilibrium. Except that we have heavily disrupted sediment inputs. We have broken sediment transfer links. We have sediment sinks where there shouldn't be sediment sinks. And all of this means that many, many sediment transfer systems are dysfunctional. And as a result of that, we have wildly unstable channels because they don't have the years and decades to adjust because the goalposts are always moving, because the sediment loads are coming in from the wrong place, or they're getting trapped in the right place, or we have sediment-starved conditions. And in the diagram here, we can see how, for instance, we may be getting lots more landslides because of deforestation. We might be getting elevated soil erosion because of arable farming. We might have accelerated bank erosion. We might have no bank erosion because we stabilized it all. We may have tributaries being in, that used to bring in a lot of sediment, not doing that anymore because there's the reservoir artificially trapping that sediment before it gets to the trunk stream. We have these dysfunctional sediment transport systems, and we see the results in terms of instability and in terms of dysfunctional river geomorphic systems. So what can we do about this? Well, this is where we get to the genesis of this idea of stage zero. And so in the next little module, we'll talk about channel evolution models, which have been around for a long time. This is not a new idea, about the fact that there used to be many more ana-branching rivers in nature than there are today. By and large, we've edited them out of that channel, stable channel design template. And that leads us then to the stream evolution model. So for me, all this began in the 1970s in North Mississippi when I was at the National Sedimentation Lab, and this is what a lot of creeks look like. This is Crowder Creek, picture taken by David Biedenhahn, and what we can see here is the outcome of a dysfunctional sediment transfer system. Because for scale there, that's a Ford LTD. That's a very big motor car, and showing you this terrible canyon that's been carved into the pasture there by this creek. And what's shocking is if we look upstream of the county road there, and the county road is holding things together through two culverts, which were never designed to be grade control structures, so they won't last, but they are at the moment protecting that part of the catchment from being ravaged and just unzipped by this instability. When we look at that, what we notice is on the right side, you see the size of that channel compared to what we've got now. And that channel actually isn't natural. That's a drainage ditch. And maybe that's what kicked this whole thing off, was that increased hydraulic conductivity, that more rapid transfer of the water downstream. Because if we look on the other branch, there isn't a channel at all. That's a wetland. It's an unchanneled zero-order basin. So basically, in this entire picture, there probably shouldn't be any channels. This should just be a wetland corridor in a wide valley. Well, the mayhem that was going on in North Mississippi then caused the Soil Conservation Service, as it then was, to call for help from three of the titans of the era, Stanley Shum, Michael Harvey, and Chester Watson at Colorado State University, to come in and say, for the Soil Conservation Service, what can we do to stop the rest of the drainage systems being ravaged? And they wrote a book about it, still in print from Water Resources Publications. And the heart of their analysis was the channel evolution phase model. It's a 5-phase model, starting with a single thread, dynamically stable, if you like, a graded stream that was just adjusted to transfer the sediment load from upstream. But then it starts to incise or degrade in stage 2, so the bed starts to drop. At that point, the banks become too high and too steep to be stable under gravity, and they slough in, putting massive amounts of sediment into the system, which actually in stage 4 then of this model stops the degradation because there's so much sediment coming in, but the banks are still too high and we go into a rapid widening phase. Eventually we form that great canyon, we start to get some sediment retained in it, we start to get vegetation coming back in, binding the soils together, and we recreate a regime channel, a graded channel, but it's now nested within this great big incised canyon. And what should be the floodplain is now a high terrace that probably only gets flooded maybe in a 100-year event. In the channel evolution model, they also did a very clever trick of ergodic reasoning. They said if you stand at one point in the system and you see head cuts coming through, you see that degradation coming by, then you go through phases 1 to 5. But if you walk downstream, you can also go through phases 1 to 5. And so this is a space for time substitution. Very nice model, 1984. About the same time, in West Tennessee, Cliff Hupp and Andrew Simon for the USGS were developing a very similar model independently. It's a 6-stage model. The main difference is that they have a constructed stage. In West Tennessee, many of those drainage systems were ditched. They were just reprofiled with bulldozers and drag lines, which didn't happen in North Mississippi. So that's why they've got a constructed phase that isn't in Shum, Harvey, and Watson. Well, at the end of the 80s, Shum, Harvey, and Watson went back to Colorado State University, and Andrew Simon moved to the Cascade Volcano Observatory. Cliff Hupp got booted upstairs to Reston, Virginia. I stayed in North Mississippi. And during the 1990s, what I observed was that a lot of these channels started getting wiggly. The incised ditches here started to be eroded on the outside of curves, and then sediment started accumulating on the inside. And there was another phase following those in the channel evolution models, which I called lateral growth, because wherever the flow attacked the canyon wall, it would push its shoulders out, yield more sediment, and develop a sinuous channel, like we see here on James Wolfe Creek during the 1990s. And everything stayed pretty much the same. Channel evolution models were applied throughout the country and abroad. And then everything changed in 2008 with a paper by Robert Walter and Dorothy Merritt, 2008, who challenged the idea that the classic streams that Leopold Woolman and Miller had said were the type sites for hydraulic geometry, for the relationship between width and depth and slope and velocity in the graded stream channel, was actually wrong, because those channels were already heavily impacted. And this absolutely set the cat among the pigeons, because to criticize Leopold Woolman and Miller was a big, big thing. But they'd done their homework, they had masses of data, and by golly, they were right. That those channels that everybody thought were type sites for natural channels were actually incised into post-settlement alluvium, material less than 150 years old. Because those valley fills had swamped the valley bottoms. There'd been thousands of low-head dams built for water wheel power, and the true floodplain, the Holocene floodplain, 300 to 10,000 years old, was buried beneath these incised channels. So what they said was that before European settlement, before the clearing of the forests, the water mills, and the massive aggradation, the streams were small anabranching channels within extensive vegetated wetlands, not single thread, not meandering, anabranching and encased in wetlands. Well, in 2008, I was on sabbatical leave with the National Marine Fisheries Service, NMFS, in Sonoma County, California, working with Brian Kluwer. Brian's a private pilot. We spent a lot of time flying around in his aeroplane, going to different sites, collecting data, and flying over valleys that were pretty pristine, that hadn't been developed for ranching or agriculture. We started to see these anabranching river wetland corridors all over the place. Just about every valley you flew over that hadn't been ranched. And so we started to believe Walter and Merritt were right, not only on the East Coast, but maybe on the West Coast. So, due diligence, we started really digging into the literature, and what we found was a lot of challenges in the literature to the idea that single-thread meandering is a natural, ubiquitous pre-disturbance condition for a river, and therefore the legit target for river restoration. And so not only Eastern US, but California, Pacific Northwest, and a lot of good stuff in Europe. And about that time also, we started to get good LiDAR-based DEMs and realized that floodplains, we always knew they weren't completely flat, but they're really not flat. The terrain in them is subtle, but it shows you that most valley floors are covered in relict channels, in old anabranching systems that have been abandoned by the river because of that incision. And so having thought about this for a while, we thought we need to update the channel evolution models because they're starting with a single thread meandering channel, thinking that's the undisturbed condition, and it's not. But we wanted to be extremely respectful of those titans and build on their work, not try and destroy it or replace it. So in our 2013 paper on stream evolution model, we started with the 1 to 7 stages carried over from channel evolution models. So we've combined Watson-Harvey with Shum and with Simon and Hupp. We've made stage 2 a possibility because you don't have to go through stage 2 constructed. You can go straight from 1 to 3. And we've added my stage 7, the laterally active. So we need something to go before stage 1. But how do we do that without screwing up the numbering system? You have stage 0. So that's what stage 0 is. It's the pre-Anthropocene disturbed condition. And it looks like what Walter and Meritz and Grossinger and the others talked about. It's an anabranching, multi-threaded system with embedded wetlands. And not only is that where the channel evolution or the stream evolution model starts, but it's also where it finishes. That if you complete the cycle, then you recreate that same kind of coupled, closely linked channel floodplain system, but now it's nested within the trench that you've dug. And the characteristics are there quite clearly. Initially, we have the multi-thread system. We concentrate it in a single thread. The banks start falling apart. We blow the channel out sideways. We then start to accumulate sediment through 5 and 6. We go sideways in stage 7, and stage 8, we're back with a multi-thread system. We also added a thing called stage 3S, which is arrested degradation. And this is really, we got from Brian Bledsoe at Colorado State University, who was working with the channel evolution model in California and Nevada, and found many situations where the river incised, but the banks never failed. They're just too strong. And the river becomes a prisoner of its own banks. And it looks like an alluvial stream, but it's not. In terms of fluvial geomorphology, it's as dead as a dodo. And so Brian very aptly called these zombie streams. They look like they're alive, but they're not. They're prisoners of materials they can't erode. So we added that. We also made it cyclical, because in Mississippi, again, staying there longer, I saw the pattern starting to repeat. And so rather than that rather linear model of the channel evolution, we made it cyclical. That means that you can short circuit it as well. And so, for instance, you can get a 3/4 short loop where it degrades, blows out, degrades again, blows out, and that's about as bad as you can get from the point of view of channel instability and high sediment yields. The other thing that I think is good about this cyclical is that you can see now that there are 2 major phases of adjustment. There's vertical adjustments, aggradation, degradation, and there are horizontal adjustments, lateral adjustments, if you like, through narrowing and widening. And that comes out very clearly in these different stages. So what is stage 0? And there's a lot of chit-chat around about what people think stage 0 is. This is all it is. It's the pre-disturbance stage in the stream evolution model. That's what it is. It's not a process. It's not a restoration technique. It may be a restoration target or a restoration goal, which essentially means just put it back like it was. We screwed it up. Let's undo that and reconstitute the true natural condition and then let it go from there. Not expecting it will stay like that, but expecting that it will now have the capability to be the best stream it can be given the hydrology and the sediment load and the slope and the catchment drivers. The other thing that was new in the stream evolution model was to add to it measures of hydrogeomorphic attributes and ecosystem benefits. And this was mostly Brian's work. But essentially here what we've got is pie charts, pie pieces. The size of the pie is proportional to the richness or the abundance of the attribute or the benefit. The pieces of the pie tell you the diversity that is in the system. And more diverse systems support more diverse ecosystems and are more productive. So you can see that as you go through the model, you lose both quantum and variability and diversity, but the good news is you get it back. Once you get into that depositional phase, the sediment is a blessing because it builds habitat and it builds complexity and it supports biodiversity. So if we are talking about restoration, then I think there's a very clear message just comes out of this diagram, that if you can be up and to the left from that diagram, you can see the big varied pie charts. So as restoration targets go, stages 5, 6, 7, 8, and 0 are really good. If you try and restore into something like a stage 3, 4, or 5, that's bad. And if you ever restore a stream to either a constructed stage or a zombie stage, that's just ugly. So let's take a break from me and go over to you. As I've described, hopefully been paying attention, it's pretty easy to see what stage you're at. Eh? You know, we just look at the banks falling down, are the trees all leaning over, is there sediment in the bed of the channel? There are these tells that mean you can work out where we're at. So let's have a look at some of these, and at your table, and I have to keep an eye on the time, but let's see if you can piece together, just by observing what you can see in the picture, and I know this isn't ideal, where you think you are on the stage 0 clock. So this one isn't Kansas, this is actually South Dakota. It's a small upland basin. All they did was the USDA put some money in to replace the tussock grass that was there with a higher yield variety grass. It changed the rainfall runoff relationship, and this happened. So what's happened? What stage are we at to? So have a quick conversation between you. If there's only 2 or 3 of you at a table, you could join with another table. So have a quick think about it. What do you see? Just say what you see. And what I'll do in a moment is I'll just pick a table and ask you to say what you think it is, and we'll then vote and see if we agree or don't. Yeah. No, it'd be much better in the field, yeah. All right, let's pick somebody out. So we'll start with John Shelley, because I don't mind picking on him. Okay, John, your table. What are you saying? Stage?
We're thinking it's more of the incisions.
Yeah, okay, so what number? 2, 3, 4? 2 constructed. I don't think anybody bulldozed that.
I guess it's, yeah, on that.
You see, it's easy. Piece of cake. Stage 3, spot on. Okay, what about this one? This is further downstream. So again, see what you say. You've got a rectangular cross-section. We've got no sediment in the bottom. We've got the banks, river cliffs. Got people there for scale. So talk it out. Say what you say. See, give me a number. Okay, so table with the gentleman taking the photo. Call it out. What stage are you saying? A 3S. Ooh, okay. Don't think so, but no, it's still going down. The banks are still failing. So you're going to 4, 5, 6? Spot on, absolutely right. Yeah, this is a 4. So this is the sort of down and out phase. It's scouring the bed, it's blowing the banks out. This is about as bad as it gets. What about this one? Okay, so look at the condition of the banks, look at what's happening on the bed, what the vegetation's doing. Again, look at the people for scale. Top width of this. I want to hear a bit of hubbub here. Talk to each other, people. This is a bit like a trivia quiz. You probably shouldn't have your phones out. Okay, how about second table back? What do you say? Victor, what do you think? A 7. 7, anybody agree? Laterally active. Yeah, the banks look kind of stable. Yeah, it started. I agree. It's 7-ish. 7. Anybody want to challenge that, or are we going with 7? Yeah, I've got this as a 5. I think it's starting to recover, but on the other hand, there is a nasty head cut in there, so it may be looping. All right. What about this one? This is North Mississippi, where it all began. That's kudzu. So what we're seeing here, you see the floodplain just in the background on the far left there? That's the floodplain. We've got riparian vegetation coming back, except the kudzu's killing it all. Got lots of sediment in the bed of the channel. What do you think, guys? Yep, that table. Pardon? It's a 7. Yeah, but again, the banks is still pretty straight. Yeah, it's a 6. I think it's getting 7-ish again. We're getting some lateral, but we haven't started taking out the cliffs yet. What about this one? This is the Andrew Simon, outstanding in rivers. And here he is, outstanding in a river. Okay, so think about what's Andrew standing on. Condition of the banks, shape of the channel. Well, I'm saying 2, 3, because he's standing on a head cut. So downstream of that head cut, it's 3. See the bank on the left-hand side is falling apart. But upstream, although the tree's leaning, it hasn't gone yet. So I don't think it's really gone into stage 3, the unstable one yet. Okay, what about this one? Again, say what you see. That should tell you what the answer is. I'll come over this side this time. Okay, far table next to the wall. But you have to shout because I can't hear you. I know, but the time. Yes, that's a 0. Could be an 8. Some people have said, oh, maybe that's the old floodplain at the bottom of the image. Maybe it's an 8, but it's definitely anastomosed, fully connected, fully hydrated. One of my favorites. So everybody, what's this? It's a golf course, yeah, it probably is. This, I think, is in Kentucky, I believe. So everywhere, I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is it? Want to say a stage, guys? Yeah. I mean, it's a rock festival, yeah. I mean, that's a 2. That's a constructed channel. So this is an official zombie channel. So we've got hardly any channel here. We've got a wetland complex. But on the other hand, we've got a highway down each valley toe. We've got properties coming out from the valley toes into the valley floor. What does that look like? Yeah. Yeah, very good. So this is one the beavers got in there and turned it into an 8. That's Chester Watson, standing, again, outstanding in rivers. This is just nasty. The floodplain's up top right there. So this is incised and then incised again. And lots of woody debris. Any ideas at the back there? Turquoise shirt. No? Anybody want to shout out? Who's brave? Show me some fingers. Yeah, 4, 3, 4. This is a 3-4 loop. So it's cut down, it's blown out, then it cut down again, and this is very, very destructive. Easy one. Beaver Meadows. 0. Yeah. Beavers will 0 you out. I think this may be the last one. So still wiggly. So hasn't been through 2, hasn't been canalized. Not very incised. Or is it incised? Yeah, stage 1. Okay, I'm going to cut it off there because we are out of time. That one's a classic 3S. That's a USDA grade control structure. Just locks it into this degraded strait forever. Why would anybody want to do that to an alluvial stream? All right, so this idea then of getting channels back to their graded condition, get them reconnected to their riverscapes, if you like. This idea, stage 0ing them. You could do that anywhere, right? Well, no, you couldn't. Absolutely not. I've never said that, and yet people say that I do say it'll work anywhere. It won't. Beads on a string. The importance of valley confinement. Remember, we said the channel form that you get is a function of the sediment supply, the water inflow, and the valley slope, and the graded profile. Except some places, the valley isn't big enough, isn't wide enough to occupy those more complex, to hold those more complex channel forms in nature's playbook. And so implicitly in Shum's diagram, the valley's getting wider as you go downstream from a supply to a transport to a deposition area. And that has been described by Briley and Friars, by Joe Wheaton, as the importance of valley confinement and confining features. In the headwaters, we see many laterally confined streams. The stream and the hill slopes are closely coupled. As you go downstream, you start to see a wider valley. The river's got a bigger canvas to work on, and we see more meandering forms, except sometimes there's an alluvial fan comes in and pinches the river against one valley wall. Sometimes there's a glacial terrace. That's not anthropogenic, that's a natural feature, and that is just a natural constraint. And then as you get down further into the wider valleys, you see the river fully express itself in terms of anabranching and having connected wetlands, where you are laterally unconfined. So in terms of the importance of the degree of confinement, Briers and Friday said it's a primary control on many fluvial geomorphic processes that occur on and along valley bottoms. The width of the canvas, the width of the riverscape is super important. And you can't have multi-thread systems in constrained valleys. They won't fit. But also the downstream sequence of valley settings is a key control on the longitudinal patterns of hydrology and sediment fluxes, and it dictates the sequence of channel types that you get. So it isn't as simple as Shum's original diagram, because you could have supply, transport, deposition, and then another transport reach, and then another deposition reach. It just depends on the degree of geological control and on the sequence of narrow and wide valley bottoms. And this is, therefore, maybe a better way of interpreting Shum's stable channel forms, is that essentially, as we go from left to right, we go from confined to unconfined settings, and we go from source to transfer to depositionary environments. And then we can see that we can have dynamically stable single thread or dynamically stable multi-thread channels, depending on how much space we've got and whether it's a source or a transfer or a deposition reach. And indeed, we could have straight or meandering. If we're constrained somewhat, we might have braided or island braided or anastomosed or meandering with side channels and oxbows if we've got space for them. What it means is then when we're talking about maybe stage zeroing, we're looking very much to the right of that red dotted line. Those are the candidate kinds of conditions where we could have a good chance of spreading the flow, rehydrating the floodplain, getting back a lot of the functionality that we lost. And that's been very nicely described as beads on a string. This diagram's from Mark Beardsley, but other people have used this too. And we can pick out the beads here and say, there's our candidate sites for floodplain reconnection in the beads. But actually, in many stream systems I've worked on, if you look carefully, the beads never quite disappear. And so maybe there's also streams where we have floodplains as ribbons. The floodplain width varies a lot, but it doesn't normally pinch out completely, such that the valley side slopes completely constrain the channel. So when we're talking about stage zero, then that's the subset. That's the places in the fluvial system we're looking for where what should be a sediment storage reach, what should be a depositional-led dynamic stability, has been replaced by an incised channel, either through ditching or through anthropogenically generated incision. Those are the candidates where undoing that anthropogenic incision is going to bear fruit because we have a floodplain to reconnect to. And why would we want to do that? And how would we ever get the guts to actually do it? So the US Forest Service, during the the 2010s got very, very unhappy with natural channel design. They just felt that the channels they were making with a 2-year bankfull capacity were too big. They just looked too big. They acted like fire hose during high flows. They had very high velocities. They were flushing sediment and animals out on a frequent basis. That wasn't what they were looking for. They started actually building smaller and smaller channels, and then they read Clure and Thorne, decided maybe we shouldn't build a channel. Maybe we'll let the river do that. And so here's an early example. This is a 4-acre drainage basin. So they started really, really small, because this is a scary thing to do. They filled the ditch in. And then within months of that rehydration, the ecology explodes on you. The vegetation comes back, and you start getting the damselflies and the macroinvertebrates, and the bottom of the food chain builds, and everything moves forward. And they really liked this. And they did this in quite a few basins, gently working up. Again, they didn't dive in the deep end of the swimming pool. They started in the paddling pool end with small, isolated basins, very low risk, very low public scrutiny, not too hard to permit because it's Forest Service land. So they can use their ARBO programmatic biological opinion. And they really liked what they saw. And we're slowing the flow, we're rehydrating the floodplain, we're reconnecting the river above to the hyperuric river below. The hyperuric river below supports another whole ecosystem of diatoms, of microbial life that support primary productivity. That's so important. And as they moved forward, they got more bold, to put it. And so here's 5 Mile Bell out on the Oregon coast. There was the incised ditch, and they got the big yellow machines out, and they filled it in. And nobody's going to do that off the bat. So if you are going to do this, start small, use some BDAs, use some muscle power. When you've learnt your craft, then it's time to scale up. If you're willing to wait a decade for beavers to do it or for natural processes to do it, use PALs and BDAs. If you're in more of a hurry and you don't really want to wait that long, use big yellow machines and do it in 2 months. It looks terrible. David Roskin describes the immediate impact as ground zero, not stage zero. But it doesn't stay that way. At 5 Mile Bell, they did some plantings, and within 3 years, the whole valley floor was a carpet of reeds and sedges and forbs and grasses and reed canary grass as well, but that's another story. And you see how the flood flows spread out here over the whole valley floor, and within 5 years, it looks like this. And this is stuffed full of coho. You can't even see the channels, but they're all in there, and the juvenile fish absolutely love it. The food is great. And this isn't an isolated case. There's a paper here by the Forest Service folks again on that sequence there for Watershed Creek on east of the Cascades, essentially in the desert. But you see how the floor of the valley has changed completely. A fire burned through there last October, and it took out all the trees on the valley walls. It didn't touch the valley floor because it's too wet. And there's numerous projects now across Washington and Oregon. A lot of them have been monitored by OWEB and by the Forest Service, and the results are extremely encouraging, but they are initial results. You know, we've got to be careful that, you know, we can't really claim success yet. It's the opening outcomes are very encouraging. It's not just in the Pacific Northwest, though. There are a lot of sites in Colorado. There's sites in Pennsylvania, which is Dorothy Merritt's doing her thing there, reconnecting. There are sites in Maryland where the a company called Ecotone, again, have been doing stage zero. Very brave, quite difficult to permit, but the results are just so much better than what you get from working in the channel. Quite a few schemes in the UK, one in Romania. And this website is, as fast as possible, trying to build up an inventory of stage 0 sites so that you can look across them. So I'll just close by showing you some examples of why I think this could have relevance to sedimentation. First example I'll show is just how effective this is at slowing the flow with all the advantages that go with slow water environments. This is Southport Mackenzie, 170 acres restored to date, 780 to be restored over the next few years. Phase 3 is underway right now. And I'll show you two videos. One is down at the bottom here, upstream in the unrestored section, and the second one is down here at the junction of phases 1 and 2. So phase 1, at 3,000 cusecs, thankful discharge. Anybody who knows hydraulics knows how fast that water is. Look at the bow wave on the bridge pier. Look at the standing waves. Any juvenile fishing at reach is going downstream fast. It's just a fire hose. Macroinvertebrates don't stand a chance. This is a really hostile environment, and that flood peak is going right through there with no attenuation and downstream to the reservoirs on the Mackenzie River. This is the same discharge on the same day in the restored reach. Nothing to see here, because that water's spread valley wall to valley wall. The velocities are low. There are some high velocity threads in there and gravel areas. There's siltation going on. There's plenty of flood refugia. And it's literally a different river. And that's what stage 0 gets you. It really does tame the flood. In terms of attenuating flood peaks, I'll show you an example from the UK, the River Aller, completed in 2023, just 142 acres, so not huge, but this is quite a small river. And again, these QR codes across the bottom there if you want to learn more about him. Or just Google River Aller and Ben Eardley, and you'll get lots and lots of good information. So this is the River Aller prior to restoration. And, you know, they looked at this and just said, see ditch, fill ditch. Don't make it any more complicated than that. This is, has very low potential, ecological potential. So the brown areas there are the fill areas, and you can see they filled all the incised reaches. That's what it looked like 2 years later. A lot of large wood to roughen the surface, slow the flow until the vegetation really gets going. And whilst there is still an anastomose channel in here, there's also very extensive wetlands that are just food factories. These are the spongy areas that are going to soak up the floods. So University of Exeter have been monitoring this since 2019. They have stage gauges upstream and downstream. They have calibrated stage discharge curves. They've got 15-minute data. So in that period from 2019 to 2024, they've got over 50,000 measurements. They've had 28 separate flood events. The flood peaks are reduced by 38%. This really works. This is a small river and a small scheme, but by gosh, it does work. Slowing the flow. Not just storing water, but just slowing the kinematic wave, the flood wave, flattening the curve like in COVID. Last example I'll show you is from Scotland. This was actually what we call a flood alleviation scheme. It's a flood control scheme to protect the town of Forres. It's on private land on the Alter estate. And we're up here in the north of Scotland. It rains a lot. It's very flashy. There's a lot of sediment. There's a lot of timber comes down the river. The Moray Council, the county council, paid for this scheme, £20 million, so not cheap. But what they did was found a nice big floodplain on the Alter estate with no infrastructure in it, and said we're going to turn that into a fully connected flood retention area. Now, to get the storage that they needed, they did have to build a small dam. So this isn't just floodplain connection, it's enhanced floodplain connection. Calling it a dam, I think, is a bit grand. It's a bit of a bund. So you can see here, it's not really visually very intrusive. It's quite a small structure. I can live with that and still call this a restoration. But the big snag was that structure is very, very vulnerable to getting blocked by sediment or large woody debris. So I was asked as a geomorphologist, how do you make sure that we don't get any debris or sediment blocking up the intake in the dam? And we don't want a sediment trap because we'll have to be emptying it twice a year forever. We want something low maintenance. I looked at the course of the stream. It's clearly unnatural. That elbow in it there is where it's embanked. It's been straightened. It's been ditched. And I said, you know what? We could store a lot of sediment and wood inside the crook of that elbow. Let's do that. So here's the aerial image showing you the crook in the elbow. This is during construction. So you see the dam up here. And we blew a hole in the left embankment, and we blew another one in the right embankment so the water could get out and back in. The ecologists on the project insisted we put in a fish passage channel to make sure the fish could get back and forth. And the landowner didn't want the channel moving all over that property. You can see he's still farming a lot of it. So we put in that berm just to sort of put buffers, put side rails on the area that the channel would shift. 1 week after the scheme was completed, we got a major flood. That flood paid for the scheme within 1 week. But it also really showed just how effective that floodplain reconnection was. And it's what got me really thinking about stage 0. Because look at the alluvial fan that built in one event. Without this, all of that sediment would have been heading down to the dam and would have been causing problems. Hundreds of pieces of wood and whole trees racked up and grounded within the reconnected floodplain, and they're still there, and they're providing habitat, and they're gently disintegrating through time. They're not blocking the dam. And no sediment, and no coarse sediment, and no wood made it out of the sedimentation area. We've calculated how much sediment we could store in there. We reckon we've got 300 years before you'd need to do any maintenance. The project worked a week after construction, and since then, in terms of attenuating those floods that would have flooded for us, there's 11 separate events where the misery of flooding in the town has been prevented by floodplain storage, enhanced by the dam. In terms of sediment retention, the secondary benefit, looking at the DEM of difference here, you can see we've got a lot of sediment, thousands of tons of sediment stored in the area, and we're nowhere near full yet. In terms of pieces of wood, you can't count them. This is just from one event. All of that wood would have been going downstream into the flood control area, and it's not. It's safely racked up on the floodplain where it's doing good. And that's just the flood control benefits. We've also now got a very complex floodplain mosaic of habitats developing, and the biodiversity is going out through the roof. It's now become a very popular asset locally with bird watchers, with walkers, with people who just want to get away from it all and have some quiet time. So stage 0 then can yield multiple benefits in hydrology, in morphology, in habitat and diversity. And those include, for sure, flood attenuation, sediment storage, not only of coarse sediment, but also fine sediment settling out, fine particulate matter settling out, fine organic matter settling out in those wetlands, getting processed, and nutrients getting cycled. But if you think stage 0 is easy, it isn't. There are high uncertainties because we don't know what the channel pattern is going to look like because it hasn't happened yet. And those can convert into high risks, or at least perceived risks. And perceived risks must be taken seriously too. Don't ever tell somebody who's worried about your project, don't worry, it's fine. We'll take care of it. You're done. They'll never listen to you again. You say, no, you know, that's a really good point. We're going to look into that. We're putting it on the risk register. So there are many uncertainties, there are many risks, and you must tread carefully. But there's a lot of good information out there. There are now literally dozens of papers on stage 0, some of them critical, some of them supportive, and there's a rich literature developing. And so I don't think this is a fad. I think it has got legs. And so if you want to get reliable information, again, just use that QR code. It will take you straight to the information hub. So where do we land? What's my take-home message? I mean, I've talked for a long time, and you've agonized over this. So what? Does it really matter? I think the take-home message is pretty simple. Fully reconnecting floodplains helps recover sediment functionality in degraded drainage systems. If you can attain that, you will make your life and managing the reservoir a lot easier. Not a silver bullet, but it will definitely help. And maybe it will take injection dredging from being necessary 300 days a year to deal with that sediment input. Maybe it will take it down to 100. Maybe it will make it economically viable. So source control, intercepting sediment isn't the answer, but I think it's part of the answer. Thank you very much. So the question is, have we come across anywhere where filling the ditch in didn't work? I mean, honestly, I think the answer is no. The big risk would be it's going to re-incise. And as long as you're careful to keep the downstream geomorphic control in place, then you're probably going to be okay, because those flows are just spread out over such a wide area. The stream power per unit area, the shear stresses are way below Craig Fishneck's permissible velocities and shear stresses for floodplain stripping. So we haven't had a case of reincision yet, but never say never. It is a possibility. The golden rule with all of this is never, ever truck any sediment out or bring any sediment in. Balance, cut, and fill. And that may dictate whether you do a stage 0 and bring it back up to the historic floodplain, or whether you do a stage 8 and just help the river push its shoulders out and create an inset floodplain. But manage, cut, and fill. What's really surprising is loads of people said, well, oh yeah, you'd have to fill the channel in with gravel and cobbles because it was a gravel and cobble bed stream. So, well, yeah, but look at what the floodplain's made of. And it ain't gravel and cobbles, it's sand and silt and clay. And so you can fill the ditch in with finer material derived from the floodplain, provided that you roughen it. So on South Fort Mackenzie, 3,000 pieces of wood. On Bear Creek at Mount St. Helens, where you're taking on, a really, really powerful system, they're using the low-tech approach, but they're doing 800 BDAs and PALs. So don't undercook it. Don't skimp. Think how much roughness you need and then double it so that you've got redundancy. And if you do that, the uncertainty is still there, but the risk is really small. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question again. What's the minimum slope you start at? The basis for design, at least for the Forest Service, is a thing called the GGL, the geomorphic grade line. So they look at the long profile of the river. This is very Mackin, J. Hoover Mackin graded profile. They look at the whole long profile and they identify where you've deviated from that because, say, of rampant incision or massive aggradation. And the geomorphic grade line is telling you about the elevations and the slope that you should have to be consistent with J. Hoover-Mackin and getting a dynamically stable system. So GGL, again, is a very straightforward analysis. You can just Google it. But the trick is in interpreting the results. It's a simple method, but it requires a really good understanding of the geomorphology of the system. And it really demands differentiating between natural variability and anthropogenic legacies. Don't be fighting natural changes in the system, because you're using diesel and muscle power and the river is solar powered. It's going to win. But if it's anthropogenic, if we did it, we can undo it, and we should. So the GGL gives you the kind of guide for grading.
Most of the examples we were seeing erosion through river flow or creek flow. Any examples doing this after burn scars or large areas where they lost vegetation that was there, and then using this kind of a method
Yeah.
to stop that erosion?
I don't know of anything post-fire myself, but my good friend Chris Herring with the Corps of Engineers leads what's called the NNBF program, Nature and Nature-Based Features. In several burned watersheds, he's built essentially low-head, valley-wide dams to trap that abundant sediment and essentially, again, kind of stage zero it. That's a bit of a heavy-handed approach, but then sometimes you need that. I mean, if the system's really, really out of whack.
Erosion after some of those large burn events is huge.
Yeah.
This would seem at least to be a step that's controllable.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a way of storing that sediment before it gets to the reservoir, before it gets to a downtown area where you can't be doing with it, and turning it into a sort of post-Holocene floodplain, which becomes an asset. The thing I thought you were going to ask me is, have we looked at any of the Walter and Merritt's ones where the historical floodplain's buried under post-settlement alluvium? I haven't, but she has. And she just strips that stuff off and redistributes it and recreates a natural valley bottom. That, again, is truly heroic stuff because it looks awful, mid-project and post-project. But you have to have faith that if you get the grades right, the river will take it from here. The instability is a big problem, but nature's got an app for that. It's a biologically driven response that's not unbeatable, but it's the most powerful thing on this planet. Yeah.
Before you started the project, do you have some reference or just based on experience, I want to return these streets into some kind of, so what's the guideline?
So the question is, so wait a minute, where's the reference reach? How do you know? So our reference is usually the pre-anthropogenic impact configuration of the river. So we go back to the GSL maps from the 19th century. We look at the journal that was written by the Reverend Smith, who came through with a wagon train and complained that getting across this valley bottom, it took them 3 weeks because it was just a morass of swamps and channels and bogs. And you go, okay, so that's what this was like beforehand. And that's your reference condition, and that's what you hope to go back to. But we're not going to go back. Lewis and Clark aren't coming back. We're not going to recreate 19th century conditions. But what we can do is reset these systems so they can go again. And they will then respond to future storms, to future fires, to future drivers of channel adjustment. And they've got as many degrees of freedom and they've got as much room as we can give them to be able to deal with that. And I think that's the best we can do. You bet.